Okay, I've got Audacity going because the last time I did one of these, the audio was problematic with OBS. Maybe that's because I needed a reboot. I've got Karak Chai today. I still have my terrible, terrible video camera. And I also have this guy's downstairs, my garden gnome. He's also in his pajamas. He's fatter than me, but I'm working on it. Yeah, I had so some stuff has been happening on the internet lately, and I'm not really paying close attention. I tend to see, like I see the news in subtweets, subtoots, whatever they're called these days. I see the news in bits and pieces. So I have no idea what people are upset about this week. Something to do with System D. This isn't a talk about System D. I don't care. But this is a talk about transparency and kind of like FOSS and FOSS nonprofits. So I did a talk ages ago. I was still wearing a suit every day, and I'll link it at the end of this video or something. Maybe I'll put it up here. Can I do that? I don't know. I'll link the video. And the talk was about transparency. It was while I was working at Nalenso, and we had a lot of different transparent processes. We had transparent salaries and lots of kind of interaction with the member owners of the co-op, and it generally worked pretty well. You'll have to forgive me that in that talk we were using a lot of Macs in the office in Nalenso at the time, and I give the talk on a Mac, so if that's going to upset you, then I'm sorry. This isn't a Mac. We're not doing this on a Mac. So that talk, I'll try to, it's very long and rambly, and it has slides. We have no slides today. We just have me in my pajamas, and I'll try to distill a little bit about that talk. So the reason this is coming to my mind is because people are there are bad actors out there, and they're bothering people, or they're saying stupid things on YouTube or whatever. And this argument I heard about a year ago from a very smart person who's very actively involved in free software and nonprofits. Not any free software projects that I've ever worked on, and not any nonprofits I've ever worked for. But someone I chatted with, and he made the point that transparency is kind of this like all or nothing deal. Like transparency is binary. Either you're transparent or you're not transparent. And wow, that's just so wrong. And so particularly when it comes, the conversation we were having was particularly when it comes to FOSS nonprofits, that you're kind of stuck in this mode of like, either you're transparent and you suffer the flames and the podcasts and the whatever, or you're opaque and you keep yourself safe from all that. And I would argue that that's kind of that's a non-choice. Those are non-options. And this person's argument was that transparency is bad because bad actors get involved. I disagree with this. I think that when you make your organization or your project or whatever opaque, that you actually invite a kind of boring sort of criticism from outside where they can kind of make up whatever they want, right? Like if you don't provide some information, some distilled information about what's going on, then people make up a story, and if they're a popular podcaster or whatever, then their dumb story gets all the attention. And so be honest, be truthful, be transparent. and recognize that we live in an age of transparency, right? Like information overload is there, but people can look up things after the fact. And a lot of these bad actors, they have a tendency to surface in Google results, or probably in the future LLM results, I don't know. But the way that people get their information is going to be the wrong way if you don't provide. It doesn't have to be a narrative, it doesn't have to be a counter narrative. You don't need to respond to these people, you really don't. Like, you just ignore them. Eventually they'll go away or they'll die, right? Like all of us will. And it's just important to have the official version, the factual version. It doesn't need to be everything. But we do live in an age of transparency. And so sooner or later you will be seen, right? If you have committed a crime, you'll probably get found out. And I think that there's a lot of doomerism lately, but there's something to be happy about, I think, with respect to the kind of people that have seriously problematic, toxic, criminal patterns of behavior that have gotten away with it in the past, because there's always this like plausible deniability, right? It's just like, oh, they seem like such a nice person in public, and so yeah, I can't possibly imagine that they would be doing something wrong behind the scenes. These days, we know, not everybody, but we know a lot of people who are creeps. We know a lot of people who are, doing deals in ways that aren't the most ethical. We know, and the information alone doesn't do everything. You have to act on that. Or, the police or the government or whoever needs to act on that. But we live in a society, and we can interact or not interact with those people based on what we see, based on what we evaluate. And the crowd, the contributors to projects, they can evaluate and decide what they want to be involved in and what they don't, who they want involved and who they don't. So you will be seen. That's kind of a given in 2026. And imagining that it's 2003 and then you can get away with a bunch of stuff. No, like, if you make a mistake, admit your mistake. Take accountability for the things that you've done. Now, this idea that transparency is all or nothing comes from, I think, this notion, and I think it's a somewhat understandable, like, free software, open source notion, that it just needs to be a fire hose all the time, right? It's like the mailing lists are fully open, the chat rooms are fully open, the discourse forum, PHPBB, whatever, fully open. Everyone can read everything all the time. Everyone can read all the source code. Everyone can read every commit. And I think there's a lot about that that's really healthy. You don't need to run organizations that way. You don't need to run projects that way. And nobody really does, if we're being honest, right? Like, there isn't a single open source project out there that's like, everything on the table, we talk about everything in public. No. And as a useful counterexample, I think projects like SQLite is the easiest kind of to point to, right? Because it's such a small team and they're very like tightly knit. But I really like this idea that Jamie Brandon, I would kind of like database fame, right? He was like, I don't think it was a sincere pitch, but he pitched this to me once. He was like, what about the idea of like over the wall open source? The issue tracker is closed. The project wall is closed. The mailing list is closed. The chat room is closed. Everything's closed. You get a tarball every month, every quarter, whatever. That's it. You get the source code. That's what we owe you. And have fun with that, right? And then we do releases or whatever, binary releases. We do distribution. And that's kind of like there's probably a revenue model there. And do I think that's a great idea? No, not necessarily. I think it's an interesting thought exercise to be like, what would that look like if you did over the wall open source instead of involving everybody in everything and allowing them to see every little detail? And so ideas like that place transparency on a spectrum. Like everything else is always on a spectrum, right? You have this gradient of exactly how transparent are you being. And on the fire hose end of the spectrum, you have information overload, right? People can't make sense of every individual commit. It's useful for auditing to be able to go back and read the commits, to see where things came from, to run some tools, to, analyze the history of the code base, do code archaeology or whatever else. But the fire hose itself is a sort of opacity, right? People can't see, can't comprehend what's going on. And so from that, you need to learn to distill information, get something useful out to people. And I think that you end up with two things when you're too traditionally opaque, right? One is that people will make up the story. So it's like, it was opaque, the decision was made this way, this is what really happened, and nobody has any idea. The other is that and those are bad actors who like make up a story. I mean, everyone makes up their own story, everybody else has their own narrative, but the bad actors in particular will make up an ugly story. And there's this other layer, which is the good actors, the people who are trying to do their best, the people who are actually involved, contributors, right? The hackers, designers, whoever, that is secrecy, a layer of secrecy or deep secrecy, any kind of secrecy leads to a lack of trust amongst those people. And maybe they will walk away from a project, or maybe they will get frustrated and, close up, and they just get involved in their one little corner and they stop engaging. Secrecy always leads to a lack of trust. And the funny thing about this is that most of these things don't require a lot of secrecy, like particularly when it comes to nonprofits. So again, this nonprofit that we were discussing, this person and I don't know how they operate, right? And I know that they have some administrative problems and so on. This particular nonprofit that I've never been involved in, I really, really do not know anything about it. But at the same time, it's kind of like, it's a nonprofit. How much secrecy do you need? It's not the FBI, right? You're not the police. You're not a law firm. Like, you don't need to be so weird. And you don't need these levels of secrecy where like every decision is this super serious, like cosplaying as lawyers and police officers kind of thing. You just don't, right? Your normal organization, you're a little extra exposed because you're a FOSS nonprofit. And so you need to be a bit careful about the messages that you put out there and things like that. But this leads to the sort of core of the talk that maybe I pointed to earlier. I don't know if I can get a card up there. I don't know how YouTube works. It'll be at the end for sure. This talk had this idea of like the little holes you used to drill in floppy disks to make them immutable, right? So basically, there's read-write and there's read-only. And the kind of the premise of that talk was that there's not really such a thing as read-only transparency. Like, by the act of transparency, by the act of telling someone something, you've changed the ecosystem in which you live. And so even if transparency doesn't mean that you invite outside input or that you allow people an opportunity to vote or whatever, that transparency kind of by its nature changes the environment in which the transparency occurs. Learning to do that skillfully so that you are transparent about the things that matter and opaque about the things that matter, because sometimes you need to, somebody really needed to be seriously reprimanded for some reason. Okay, then you do that, right? And you don't want that thing to be out on the internet, preferably. That you're a bit careful, and then when you actually act in a transparent way, that you're doing that intelligently and distilling the right information for people. So I think I'm already over time here. This is over 15 minutes, and I wanted to keep this one short. But I actually think that I really like Alan Day's updates, right? The GNOME Foundation updates, the foundation updates that he puts on his blog are exactly the right distillation level. Like, they're super useful. They tell you what is moving forward with the foundation. And I think that this is a useful refactoring from the way that the foundation used to operate, which has tended to be fairly opaque. And I think that other FOSS nonprofits can benefit from learning from this, right? Like, take the idea of the last week or two, distill it down, and say to people, we did a thing. We automated a process. We fixed something, right? There was an attack on FlatHub yesterday or the day before. Like, we struggled with something, right? There was a challenge. Hey. And so we got to the other side of that thing. Thank you to Bart and Andrea and everybody else who works on infrastructure. It can be a really thankless job, and that's a big pain in the butt. And I expect to see that in one of Alan's updates soon. But there are newer, I think, FOSS nonprofits. I don't know whether or not the Modal people incorporate as a nonprofit or not, to be decided. But the Postmarket people, Postmarket OS, right? PMOS, they haven't released their new name yet, and so we don't know. But I think that they do a great job. And I think that probably as they grow larger, and they almost certainly will, because they're like a nice group of folks, I think that we will find that they probably can't be as transparent as they are right now, right? But like, I think that they're doing a great job of going in the right direction first, which is just max out on transparency, learn where it doesn't work, and then they'll dial it back over time as the organization matures. They'll figure out, like, these things can be transparent. At the moment, they like publish almost every line item of like accounting and stuff, which is awesome. I love that. But I mean, not every organization, including theirs, will do that probably for the long term. But I think that it's nice to see. It's really nice to see organizations who are, wrestling with this idea of transparency in free software, in the nonprofit space that supports free software, and figuring out where do you strike a balance over there. But certainly not by locking everything up and being completely opaque. I think that's some of the reason for that is battle scars, right? For some of these folks. But it's also, to me, it points to a lack of maturity. Says the guy recording a YouTube video that no one will watch in his pajamas with his pajama GNOME. Yeah, okay. So that's enough of that. Transparency, good. Be a little careful about it. If people want to chat with me about transparency in the free software space, I'm happy to talk about it. I think it's an interesting topic, and not always an easy one, but I think it's a conversation worth having. Cool. Okay, that's enough. I'm gonna drink this tea and then go meet James to talk about MGMT because he's in Halifax today. Okay, bye.